I'll never forget that evening. Michael and I had just put the kids to bed and were about to watch a movie when the phone rang. The screen displayed my mother-in-law Margaret's name. "Hi, Mom," Emily answered. "What's happened?" I watched as my wife's face changed from mild surprise to shock and horror. "What? No, this can't be." Her voice trembled. "We'll come right now." Emily hung up and looked at me with glassy eyes. "Mom has cancer," she whispered. Stage 4. The world around us seemed to stop. Margaret had always been a strong woman, a true pillar of the family. The thought that she could be seriously ill seemed unreal. We quickly got dressed, called a babysitter for the kids, and drove to Margaret's house. The whole way, Emily was silent, tightly gripping my hand. Margaret met us at the door. She looked pale and exhausted, but was trying to smile. "Oh, dears," she said, hugging Emily. "I'm so sorry I had to give you such news." Emily broke down into tears. "How could this happen? You've always taken care of your health." I stood nearby, feeling awkward and not knowing what to say. Margaret had never been my favorite person. We often argued and disagreed, but now I felt only sympathy and a desire to help. Margaret turned to me. "Thank you for coming. I know we haven't always gotten along, but now I need the support of the whole family." I nodded, trying to find words. "Of course, Margaret. We're here for you." The next few hours passed as if in a fog. Margaret talked about her diagnosis, the upcoming treatment, and how she's afraid of becoming a burden to the family. "I don't want you to sacrifice your lives for me," she said. "But I'm scared to be alone." "Mom, don't even think about that." Emily hugged her tightly. "We'll be here, right, Michael?" I looked at these two women, so different and so similar at the same time. "Yes," I replied. "We'll get through this together." We returned home well past midnight. Emily was exhausted and went straight to bed, and I sat in the kitchen trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Our family's life was about to change dramatically, but I was ready to support Emily and Margaret in this fight, if only I had known then what I was really getting into. 2 weeks had passed since that evening when Margaret told us her diagnosis. During this time, our life had completely turned upside down. Emily took leave from work to take care of her mother. I tried to spend more time with the kids so they wouldn't feel neglected. Margaret moved in with us. We cleared out the guest room for her, and now the house was filled with the smell of medicine and quiet conversations. But something was bothering me. I couldn't say exactly what, but some sixth sense told me that not everything was as it seemed. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw Margaret preparing breakfast. She was humming something to herself and looked too lively for someone with stage 4 cancer. "Good morning, Margaret," I said. "How are you feeling?" She turned around, and for a second, I thought I saw something guilty in her eyes. "Oh, Michael. Good morning. I'm a little better today, thank you." I nodded, pouring myself coffee. "Glad to hear it. What about chemotherapy? When do you start?" Margaret hesitated. "Oh, the doctor said we need to wait a bit longer, prepare the body and all that." Something in her voice sounded insincere. I decided to dig deeper. "Can I take a look at your medical documents?" Maybe we should get a second opinion." Margaret turned sharply to me. "Why don't you believe me?" "No, no, of course not." I tried to smooth over the situation. "I just want to make sure we're doing everything possible." Margaret relaxed a bit. "Of course, dear. I'll show you later, okay? Right now, they're somewhere in boxes after the move." I nodded and left the kitchen, feeling my suspicions grow. Something wasn't right here. Over the next few days, I started observing Margaret more closely. I noticed that she often forgot about her illness when she thought no one was watching. She could play with the grandchildren for hours, showing no signs of fatigue or pain. One evening, I accidentally overheard her talking on the phone. "Yes, Lisa, everything's going according to plan. Emily is taking such good care of me." "No, no, no. No one suspects anything yet." I froze behind the door, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Could my suspicions be justified? Could Margaret be lying about her illness? But why? And what should I do with this information? Now, I returned to Emily's in my bedroom, feeling a heaviness in my heart. My wife was sleeping, exhausted from taking care of her sick mother. How could I tell her about my suspicions without destroying her world? I lay down next to her, staring at the ceiling and realizing that I faced a difficult choice: reveal the truth and risk destroying the family, or stay silent and become complicit in this deception. One thing I knew for sure: I needed evidence, and I was ready to find it. I spent the next few days gathering information. I started small, asking Emily to show me Margaret's medical documents. My wife was surprised but agreed. "Here," she said, handing me a folder. "I just don't understand why you need this." I shrugged. "Just want to better understand the situation. Maybe I'll find some experimental therapy or something like that." Emily smiled, and tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you for caring so much about Mom." A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it away. I was doing this for our family. After examining the documents, I realized they looked suspiciously generic. No specific data, no doctor signatures. Everything was too vague. The next step was to follow Margaret. I started working from home to be able to observe her behavior. One day, when Emily had gone shopping and the kids were at school, I saw Margaret leaving the house. She looked around and quickly walked down the street. I decided to follow her. Margaret walked to a small cafe a couple of blocks from our house. There, a woman I had never seen before was waiting for her. I sat at the next table, pulling my baseball cap lower over my eyes, and listened to their conversation. "Lisa, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Margaret was saying. "Michael suspects something." "Don't be silly," replied the woman, who was apparently named Lisa. "You've held out this long. Think about how happy Emily is when you're around." I felt my blood run cold. There it was, the evidence I was looking for. Returning home, I was in turmoil. Now I knew for sure that Margaret was lying, but what should I do with this knowledge? I decided to try one more method. I called the hospital where Margaret was supposedly being treated, pretending to be her son. "Hello, I'd like to inquire about my mother's condition." "Margaret Thompson," I said. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a patient by that name," the nurse replied. This was the final confirmation I needed. Margaret had indeed made it all up. That evening, when Emily was putting the kids to bed and Margaret was watching TV in the living room, I sat in my office trying to decide what to do next. On one hand, I couldn't allow this deception to continue. It was destroying our family from the inside, making everyone live in constant stress and fear. On the other hand, I understood why Margaret had taken this step. She was lonely, felt she was losing connection with her daughter and grandchildren. This lie had brought her back the family's attention and care. I looked at the family photo on my desk, happy faces of Emily, the kids, even Margaret. Could I destroy this happiness, even if it was built on a lie? But then I thought about how exhausted Emily was, how she worried, how the kids were afraid of losing their grandmother. Was it fair to make them go through this? I realized I was facing the most difficult choice of my life, and whatever I decided, the consequences would be serious. A week had passed since I learned the truth about Margaret's deception. This week was like walking through a minefield. Every time Margaret complained about her condition, every time Emily looked at her mother with concern, I felt everything inside me tighten from the need to keep this secret. One morning, as Emily and I were having breakfast in the kitchen, she suddenly said, "You know, Michael, I'm so grateful for everything you're doing for Mom. You've become a real son to her." I nearly choked on my coffee. A sense of guilt overwhelmed me. "Emily, listen," I began, but then Margaret entered the kitchen. "Good morning, dear," she said, smiling weakly. "Oh, I'm not feeling well today." I saw Emily immediately jump up to help her mother. "Mom, maybe you should lie down. I'll bring your medicine." I watched this scene, feeling everything boiling inside me. Margaret's lie was not only manipulating Emily's feelings, but also exhausting her physically and emotionally. "Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "maybe we should go to the doctor to check if everything's all right." Margaret shot me a quick glance in which I saw a flicker of worry. "No, no, dear. It's just a common malaise. It'll pass." But Emily interjected, "Michael's right. Better to check. I can drive you right now." I saw Margaret start to panic. She clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. "No need to worry, honey. I'll make an appointment myself." "Okay," Emily frowned, but Margaret responded, "Emily, I put my hand on my wife's shoulder. Let's give Mom some time. If she gets worse, we'll definitely go to the doctor, right?" Margaret nodded with relief. "Of course, Michael. Thank you for understanding." When Emily left the kitchen, I looked straight into Margaret's eyes. "We need to talk," I said quietly. That night, after Emily put the kids to bed, Margaret nodded silently, and I saw fear in her eyes. She understood that I knew her secret. All day, I was on pins and needles. I tried to work, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. How should I proceed? Give Margaret a chance to confess everything herself or directly accuse her of lying? That evening, when the house quieted down, I went down to the living room. Margaret was already waiting for me there, nervously fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "Michael, wait," I interrupted her. "Before you say anything, I want you to know I know everything. I know you lied about your illness." Margaret lowered her head, and her shoulders shook with sobs. "I didn't mean to." I just, I felt so lonely, so useless. I sat down next to her, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sympathy. Margaret, do you understand what you've done? You've made the whole family go through hell. Emily is exhausted, the kids are scared, and all this because of a lie. She raised her tear-filled eyes to me. I know I did a terrible thing, but when I saw how everyone rallied around me, how Emily started spending more time with me, I couldn't stop. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. What are you going to do now? Margaret shook her head. I don't know. I can't lose Emily and the grandchildren, but I can't continue this lie either. I looked at this broken woman and realized I was facing the most difficult choice of my life: expose Margaret and possibly destroy our family, or give her a chance to fix the situation herself. You have 2 days, I finally said. 2 days to decide how you're going to get out of this situation. If you don't tell Emily the truth in 2 days, I will. Margaret nodded, wiping away tears. Thank you, Michael. I'll try to fix everything. I stood up and headed for the door, but stopped at the exit. Margaret, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for Emily and our children. With these words, I left, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and sense of guilt. 2 days passed as if in a fog. I observed Margaret, trying to understand if she was preparing for a confession or looking for a way to continue her deception. She was quieter than usual, often sitting alone in her room, supposedly resting. Emily noticed the change in her mother's behavior and started worrying even more. Michael, I think Mom is getting worse, she said to me on the evening of the second day. Maybe we should insist on hospitalization. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Time was running out, and Margaret still hadn't decided to confess. Let's wait until tomorrow, I replied, knowing that tomorrow everything would change one way or another. If she doesn't get better, we'll definitely go to the hospital. Emily nodded, hugging me. Thank you for being here. I don't know how I would have coped without you. Her words were like a knife to my heart. I felt like a traitor, hiding the truth from my wife. On the morning of the third day, I woke up with a heavy heart. Today, everything was supposed to be resolved. Going down to the kitchen, I saw Margaret sitting at the table with a cup of tea. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept all night. Good morning, Michael, she said quietly. Good morning, Margaret, I replied, pouring myself coffee. Have you made a decision? She took a deep breath. I can't do it, Michael. I can't lose Emily and the grandchildren. They're all I have. I felt everything inside me tighten with disappointment and anger. So you prefer to continue torturing them with this lie? Margaret, do you understand what you're doing? What else can I do? Her voice sounded desperate. If I confess, they'll hate me. I'll be left all alone. I looked at this broken woman and realized that now the choice was entirely up to me. I could expose her lie right now, put an end to this deception, or I could remain silent and become complicit in this cruel game. On one hand, the truth could destroy our family. Emily would be devastated to learn of her mother's deception. The children could lose trust in their grandmother. Margaret herself would probably be banished from the family, left in complete loneliness. On the other hand, Continuing the lie was slowly eating us from the inside. Emily was exhausting herself, taking care of her sick mother. The children were living in constant fear of losing their grandmother. How long could this go on? A month? A year? How long could we live in this illusion? I stood in the kitchen, looking at Margaret, and felt the weight of this decision on my shoulders.